I think the thing about business is you sort of just have to go with it. I'm still young enough that I would like to be, continuing with business for a long time. Equally with racing, I'd love to do more of it, but of course that requires.
Ed McDermott, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much for having me.
Likewise. So you got into racing off the back of entrepreneurship. What skills and life lessons did you take from entrepreneurship into your racing?
Well, entrepreneurship's it can be very, very differing in its in the way that it's put together, and everyone's entrepreneurship journey is perhaps slightly different than the other. What the amazing thing about racing and it's into business as well is that it requires a lot of attention, it requires a lot of energy, and it requires a lot of looking into the detail and the data and really understanding what you're trying to do. Now, unlike football or tennis or something that's very much more sort of, let's say, hand-eye coordination, racing involves this other thing, which is the car. So that car has to sort of become an extension of you. That's not a natural thing. So it's very rare that people will just jump into a race car and immediately be fast. So it can be quite humbling. And I think I know lots of other entrepreneurs into racing who are very good at lots of things potentially, and also maybe are very good at sports. But then they get into a race car and it's like this whole, they start from very little or nothing really, and they're very, very slow initially, and it really takes time to build up. And I think that's why it's such a satisfying and interesting thing to do, because you're always looking for improvements, and those improvements end up becoming where your business can differentiate itself against another business. For example, it is all about those tiny little details, those little nuances, the things that you do slightly better than perhaps your competitor, that can be the difference between a massive success and potentially failure. So racing is very similar.
Hey, you were saying about the similarities between racing and entrepreneurship, and I thinking as you're saying that it, because you're constantly in this high tense environment of entrepreneurship, that kind of translates well to racing, because that's in both those situations you're in the moment. So with running a business, you're constantly thinking about sales, your overhead, your expenses, staff, customers, etc. Was this very different from racing? When you're actually in the race, you have to be present in the moment, because one mistake and you end up, well, worst case scenario, crashing, or
worst case scenario, crash. Best case scenario, you win the race.
See where I'm going with this? Like, similarities, whilst not a copy and paste, they're similar to where you could take one from the other.
Absolutely. Look, I think that, racing, entrepreneurship, there's kind of metaphors for life in all of those things. And, when you boil it down, in order to progress in life, or nothing will change in life if you stay on exactly the same path and don't take any risks and don't step away from that and don't look at opportunities as they come. And racing can be very similar to that. Even, for example, if you have a wet race, you're constantly looking for grip, and the track is always evolving. And entrepreneurship's very much like that. The market doesn't necessarily stay static. You have to be willing to look for that opportunity and try different things that might differentiate yourself from competitors, for example. So absolutely, a lot of similarities.
As it gets into racing,
Absolutely love cars. Since style, cars were, engineering, but it looked like art to me. The expression and beauty in these cars, and also in their mechanical makeup as well, just always used to excite me enormously. And I was actually, because I'm quite tall, I'm best part of 6'5". Being a racing car driver was not on my agenda at all. I always thought it was sort of small guys like jockeys, effectively, because you think of Formula One drivers rather than potentially sports car drivers. And I just never knew it was an option to me. As I sort of grew up, I have always been around cars. And, you know, with a little bit of success, that allowed me to, you know, buy some nice cars. And that then meant I spent lots more time going with those road cars on track days, on race tracks where you can go and take your road car around. And then gradually, as is the human condition, I wanted slightly more than that. That's what someone threw me the keys to it, or let me have a go in their race car. And from that moment, I was like, oh, yeah, this is happening. And it all happened very quickly thereafter that.
It sounds kind of like I want to use the term romantic in the sense that with your love of cars, to actually be finally given the opportunity to go and race a race car is almost like a dream come true.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I never, as I said, I never even thought about racing as an option for me. And then when I realized that it was, yeah, I went for it at full tilt. And, you know, not everyone is, I guess, fortunate enough to be able to go and race GT cars, but there are a lot of sort of lower club series type thing. And when I say lower, I don't mean that from a talent perspective, because there's some extremely talented drivers at sort of club level racing. But, you know, there are some much cheaper ways to go and race, and it can be just as enjoyable. I mean, I still go and enjoy sort of racing Mazda MX-5s on a weekend sometimes, or, you know, there's lots of other sort of much cheaper ways to go racing. So it is somewhat more accessible than I ever realized. But again, it's only as I've become much more involved and understood the racing landscape that I've been able to go and, you know, understand that. So perhaps it's not as well promoted as it could be. So, you know, that's one thing I'd love to see sort of racing in general promoted a bit better, because it is somewhat accessible. Obviously, it's a reasonable financial commitment, even at the sort of lowest level, but it is doable.
So you're saying about the advertising in racing. I was thinking about the BTT.
I know the British Touring Car Championship very, very
exactly. I looked at it and I thought this could actually be something if it was marketed and done right. This is kind of the same with the British Mini Car Championship we've got here in the UK. Why do you think certain racing categories like GT4, BTs, and all the rest aren't really as well advertised as Formula One? Because I know Formula One's very much geared towards here's the best like engineering marvel we've got at this current point in time, but besides that,
yeah, look, I understand why F1 is what it is. It's a bit of a circus. It's a bit of a, you know, as you correctly say, I don't really see it as like this is the best drivers in the world. A lot of people will be like, oh no, that's some talent, and you're willing to just keep going, and a few things fall your way. You still have to be a very good driver, don't get me wrong, but, you know, if you look at the guys who are in the top 5 of British touring cars, for example, I have absolutely no doubt that had they had the right sort of money and backing and everything else, that, you know, a few of them could have quite easily become Formula One drivers. So racing, unfortunately, especially the higher you go, the more about money it becomes. And I think British touring cars is a very good, obviously, if you're looking at like a Vauxhall Vectra versus a Formula One car, you can sort of, yes, the Vauxhall is a cool car, by the way, because all it is it's a race car with the shell of a Vauxhall Vectra over it, but it's not quite as attractive or alluring as these amazing pieces of carbon fiber with all their, you know, intricate wings and aero downforce British Touring Car Championships. And it's much more geared towards perhaps a slightly more blue collar crowd, I think is the best way to put it. Whereas perhaps GT racing, you know, being Ferraris, Aston Martins, McLarens, maybe it's a bit more aspirational in terms of the types of brands involved. And you look at World Endurance Championship, which is, you know, probably, well, it's the pinnacle, have amazing types, hypercars, and again, some amazing pieces of engineering in that series. But again, it doesn't have anywhere near the coverage or interest that Formula One gets. Of course, everyone knows the 24 Hours of Le Mans, which is part of the World Endurance Championship series, but it's probably the most famous individual race outside of the Monaco Grand Prix globally, but it doesn't have anywhere near the levels of money involved as that of Formula One. So Formula One is just it's such a unique proposition that I think it's very difficult for any other series to get even close. But one thing that is interesting, and I've noticed over the last few years, is that a lot of people are getting kind of bored of F1 and are starting to look at endurance racing, such as the kind of racing that I do.
So you were saying about like everyone's kind of going away from F1 and having a look at.
In your case, you're racing a Mitsubishi.
Say that would help with.
So I race a Mercedes AMG, and I think it definitely has an appeal, the kind of cars that you see in sports car racing, because of the brands. You know, yes, you have your sort of Mercedes, your BMWs, your Fords, but you also have Ferrari, McLaren, Aston Martin, some very big and alluring brands, which I think are very, very aspirational, which is why obviously it appeals to more and more people. And I think also because the cars look like cars that people can go and see at car shows and, will sometimes see on the motorway, or if they're in London, they'll see all the time. These cars look very much like their road car cousins, but they just have big wings on them and more aerodynamics, and sometimes are quite a lot louder. And it's a race car that you can connect with. Whereas I think when you see a prototype, a Formula One car, it's a sort of unusual looking piece of kit that you would never realistically, as a normal person, I've never driven a Formula One car. I don't know many people who have. So it's not that relatable, I think, is the best way to put it.
We've jumped the gun massively on this. What is GT4 Racing, for those who don't know? We've spent like all this in conversation and we've not even addressed it.
So in GT racing, there are different categories. You have GT3, GT2, and GT4. A GT4 is a car that's based on a production model. So effectively, if you imagine at the factory, a chassis is built, which is ultimately going to become a road car. The point that the chassis is built and they've put some lights on it and, some typical road car bits, it then sort of goes right or left off the production line. And then they start putting race car bits on what is effectively a road car chassis. So a GT4 it's closer to a road going car than a GT3, for example. So GT3 is like the top category. If you imagine that is, let's say, 75% race car and 25% road car. So it might have the headlights from a road car, the rear lights. It might have a few bits that it's taken from the road car in order to keep costs down. And a GT4 might be more like 50% road car, 50% race car. So it basically race cars based on production models, as opposed to built from scratch like a Formula One car, which is a complete prototype. And GT4 and GT3, they're homologated. So the manufacturer has to have the car homologated so that it can race in a series, which means that when you turn up to a race weekend in a championship, they know that everything is built to spec and you're not putting any special aftermarket parts on. So like the suspension has to be that particular suspension. It has to be those particular brake options. It has to be those particular headlights, all these sort of things. And then they can use something called balance of performance, which is either utilizing weight, adding or taking away power, and adding or taking away ride height, so that you can have a BMW and a Mercedes and an Aston Martin all capable of doing exactly the same lap time. So we do what's, GT4 is typically multi-class racing. So you have lots of different brands that will be racing together, and they all have to, theoretically at least, be able to do exactly the same lap time. So then it becomes about the driver and not one car being better than the other. It's allowing multiple different brands to race together at the same time, on the same track, in the same race, with the same level of advantage. But the Ford, for example, might make up its lap time differently than, say, the Mercedes. So the Ford might be really strong in a straight line, but not so good in the corners because it's a sort of bigger, heavier car. And the Mercedes may be not so good on the straight line speed, but it might be brilliant on corner entry and mid corner. So net, they make up their lap time exactly, to the closest hundredth of a second, but ultimately it allows you to be competitive.
In your Mercedes up against Lamborghini, McLarens, Fords, or the other car brands, and just what's been your overall racing experience in general? Because I can't remember which race I watched, but it was a GT4 race, but at the same time there was a GT3 race going on at the same time. Two questions: A, what's your experience been like, and B, why would you have two categories racing on the same track at the same time?
So I'll address the question about why multi-class racing is really cool and people love it. So, for example, Le Mans, which is the most famous 24-hour race in the world, it's multi-class racing. So you have three different classes in that race. Hypercars, which are very, very, very fast. They're much faster than everything else. LMP2 cars, which are the second fastest thing on track. And then GT3 cars. So LMGT3s in the case of Le Mans. So you have three races all going on within one race. You have three different classes, three different podiums, and effectively the balance is the hypercars have to be able to get past the slower cars without causing any issues, without losing lap time. The slower cars have to be able to navigate and make sure that these faster cars get through without them losing lap time. It all adds to the overall challenge and strategy of a race. In British GT, which is what I have spent most of my time driving in, we have GT3s and GT4s. GT3s typically are about 8 to 10 seconds a lap quicker than the GT4s. So we're having two races within the same race. And the part of the challenge is making sure that you navigate the traffic well. So in our case as GT4s, we have GT3s trying to needing to overtake us in droves, and we're also having our own race at the same time with other GT4 cars. So it adds to the overall challenge and spectacle. And as I said, strategy becomes an important thing. Safety cars and the race being neutralized by things like full course yellows makes it a much more interesting spectacle, rather than just a single class all just racing together as a one big sprint. So that's the general rule. It's to get big grids of cars, all racing their own race, but also respecting what's going on as the overall race.
So what is your experience with racing?
You don't just race on your own, you also race in a team with Seb Morris.
In your own little team as well?
Yeah, so Seb is my teammate. We in our series, each class, whether you're in GT3 or GT4, you have two drivers. And that means that it's a team event. So we race with Team Parker, which are a fantastic team. Team Parker Racing, very, very well-known team, have been around. Well, particularly well-known for Porsches. They do a lot of Porsche racing in Carrera Cup and other big Porsche series, but they've also been British GT champions in the Bentley GT3 and also last year in the Mercedes AMG GT4. And Seb was racing with then Charles Dawson, who looks to be on course to potentially be champion of GT3 this year in a Mercedes GT3. So my experience is I love the team nature of it. I love the fact that you have two drivers of different abilities. So Seb, for example, is a former factory driver, a works driver. He's a proper professional driver. And then there's me, who's an amateur driver who wants to get better and better and better. And my goal is to be as close to Seb on lap time as possible. But the reality is Seb is, this is what he's done his whole life. So he's always going to be quicker than me. So my goal is to try and get within 1 second of Seb's lap time. And if I can do that consistently, then we're in a very, very good place. So I love that piece of the challenge. And then I also love the challenge of racing other people in the same category of driver as me, which is bronze graded, and, trying to beat them. Because some of these guys are extremely wealthy, are spending a lot of money on testing and honing their skills, getting a lot of seat time. I probably am not in a position to spend quite the same amount of money as some of these guys. Luckily, I have some partners and sponsors, if you like, who I work with. But still, we can't afford to go testing 2 or 3 days a week like some of these guys. So for me, there's that other side of things. If I can beat people who are spending a lot more, doing a lot more, while I'm doing less, but I'm committed in the gym, I'm committed on the simulator, I'm spending a lot of time, not so much in the car, but outside the car, preparing for when I'm in the car. So my experience has been, I love the team nature of it. I love the challenge of dealing with the GT3 cars as they're trying to come through, because they're typically 8 to 10 seconds a lap quicker than we are, whilst also battling the other people within my class. So you've got to use the GT3s to your advantage, and equally they're trying to use your being a slower car to their advantage if they're getting chased by another GT3 car. So it's this constant game of sort of cat and mouse, and you have to be respectful to one another, because otherwise crashes happen, and crashes get very, very expensive. And of course, it's, you know, the danger element as well, which isn't pleasant. So yeah, it's just the whole thing I love about it, and I think that's why, going back to my previous point about some people are switching off a little bit towards Formula One and starting to look at endurance racing a lot more. And we also have some very interesting people, you know, ex-Formula One drivers. Valentino Rossi, the MotoGP multi-champion, he's now a GT3 driver in GT World Challenge and World Endurance Challenge. So he's World Endurance Championship, sorry. He's brought a lot more eyes to the sport than previously perhaps were there.
Do you prefer the overall racing atmosphere for GT4 racing as opposed to, say, more well-known
racing types? Because what you were saying, where it's more for GT4 races, where it's more for balancing act. You're not just racing each other, but you've got to make sure that you leave enough. You say it's more of a unique challenge, because the GT3 drivers, yeah, they've got to watch out for you guys, but they can just blitz past where you've got to essentially go, I'm trying to overtake my opponent, and also got to let these 3 other cars get behind me.
Yeah, no, I think it's great. What I also love about it is, with regards to people that come and watch the racing, both particularly live, you know, guys who come to, guys, girls, kids, it's such a more welcoming atmosphere, because, you know, if you go to an F1 race, you're not getting anywhere near the cars unless you're spending a huge amount of money or you've got some sort of VIP access. In GT racing, you know, fans can come and get up really close and personal with the cars. They can come even into the garage in some cases and sit in the car and engage with it. And, you know, that's what I love about it. You actually get to meet the people that are enthusiastically watching you. There's some brilliant people who, you know, their hobby, for example, is motorsport photography. So they'll come and send you throughout the weekend amazing photos that they've taken, you know, really talented people. And they're just doing it often as a hobby, like we are, you know, effectively. And we're just kind of all in it together. And I love that whole thing about GT racing. It's much more approachable. You know, there's not arrogance. Everyone's, you know, we all want to win. We all take it very seriously. But, you know, there is camaraderie. You know, you do care about your team a lot. You get to really know the people who work on your car. Yeah, I just love the whole thing. It's a great atmosphere and a great place to spend your time.
How far could you progress in GT4 racing? Would you aim to go into GT3, or is there kind of a limit?
I don't think there's any limit. I think for me, definitely GT3 is on the horizon, and I have spent a bit of time in some GT3 cars. I haven't actually raced, you know, properly raced any of them yet, but I've done some robust testing of the equipment, and they're definitely a step up in terms of not necessarily the skills that you have to utilize to drive one fast. That's just more getting used to having a bit more aerodynamic downforce, because GT4s, one thing I should have mentioned about the difference between a GT3 and a GT4 is a GT3 has a lot more aerodynamic capability than a GT4. So you can carry a lot more speed utilizing aero, whereas with a GT4, there isn't a huge amount of aero. So it's really what the limit of the mechanical grip is. Whereas GT3, you definitely have to get used to utilizing aero more. So yeah, definitely my goal is ultimately, a lot of people say they want to go and race at Le Mans. I would love to race at Le Mans, obviously, but there are other series and other big 24-hour races that really appeal to me, perhaps even more than that, such as Spa 24 hours. There's a brilliant race in Australia called Bathurst 12 hours. I really want to do that. And I have begun racing at the Nürburgring last year, and they also have a Nürburgring 24 hours. And actually, Nürburgring 24, Spa 24, and Le Mans 24 are all typically every year within the same 3 weeks. You have 3 weekends on the bounce where you have these big 24-hour races. So it's a very cool time of year, and one day, who knows, hopefully we'll get to do all of them.
I've never heard of
a 24-hour racing.
Yeah, so the idea, so 24-hour races, it's multi-class. Similarly, or typically it's multi-class. So in Nürburgring, you might have lots of different classes, GT3s, GT4s, all sorts of other road-based race cars as well that have been sort of modified road cars in different classes. Then you have, that's at Nürburgring. Then you have Spa, which is actually a single only GT3s. So it's the biggest GT3 race on the planet. Typically have 50, 60, 70 cars in it, with lots of professional, all-out professional teams, plus some pro-am teams, which is, you know, a mix of a couple of amateurs and a pro or two pros. But typically these 24-hour races, it's somewhere between 3 and 4 drivers per car. And they literally take it in stints to do the whole race, 24 hours. So one driver will be in for, you know, a 2-hour stint, followed by the next, and they just keep rotating until the 24 hours is done. There's a huge amount of strategy involved. Obviously, the cars have to be reliable for the full 24 hours, because the only respite those cars get is when they come in for a pit stop and have fuel and tire changes. Otherwise, they are at full tilt the whole 24 hours. So 24-hour racing is so exciting, so much fun. You know, you're obviously racing in the middle of the night, dark, just headlights everywhere, and it's just an incredible experience. I've done a few 24-hour races in modified road cars, effectively, and it's just great fun. You know, it's so weird and so unique being on a racetrack at 2 a.m., you know, when it's pitch black and there's just a massive train of lights going round and round and round. And you're not going, you know, you're going faster than you do in the daytime often, because it gets cooler at night as well, and the engines are running a little bit better. But yeah, the race doesn't get any slower because it's middle of the night.
Right, but also I was just thinking it's more of an endurance test for the drivers, because at the moment I'm really struggling with my sleep, but you've essentially got a 2-hour break and then you're back concentrated for 2 hours, and it's just on and off the time. Would you say it's more of a mental game as well, not just you know what I mean? Not just the racing part of it, it's more you've got to cognitively be there the entire time, even in the respite. So you're mentally prepared to go back on for another 2 hours, so like 4 o'clock in the morning.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the whole thing. You're basically being carried by adrenaline through the whole race. And the reality is the weekend always starts a lot earlier than the race. You know, you've been there for 2 or 3 days beforehand. The team have been working hard, you know, making sure the car's always prepared, always absolutely perfect. So it's not just 24 hours you're not really getting any sleep for. It's actually probably 3 or 4 days, or in the case of Le Mans, they're there for like a week beforehand. So, you know, by the time the race comes, they've had lots of already sleepless nights, and then they're just operating on pure adrenaline for 24 hours. And it is completely a mental game. But I think racing in general is a mental game. You know, if you try and overdrive the car, or you're stressed, or you're not actually just completely in the moment, the best state to be in when you're driving a race car is absolutely in the flow state, where you're just totally, the only thing you're thinking about is what's happening right in front of you. You're not worried about what might happen in 10 minutes, or if you are, you're probably going slower, and that's all you're doing, just focusing on what you're doing. That's when you're going your quickest normally.
Are you looking to entrepreneurship to fund your racing goals, and over time you're going to start cutting back from that? Because I had a NASCAR driver called Jesse on a couple ago, and that's what he did. He entrepreneurship and his racing. Are you looking to do something similar and just start to go more into your racing career, or are you looking to kind of do both?
Look, I love business. I love making things work. It doesn't always work. That's the nature of entrepreneurialism. I've come off the back of quite a long stint with a venture capital fund, which is listed, which has been extremely difficult to make work, partly just because the market conditions have been so difficult, but also had some difficult legacy assets to deal with. And that's just the nature of life. You know, it's very, very frustrating, but sometimes I think the thing about business is you sort of just have to go with it. I'm still young enough that I would like to be, you know, continuing with business for a long time. Equally with racing, I'd love to do more of it, but of course that requires more and more capital. So what I have tried to do over the last couple of years, which has been somewhat successful, is build the sort of entrepreneurial pursuits and utilize the connections and ability to do business and make that part of how racing is funded. So have partners who want to do deals with potentially other partners that I have. Therefore, they're able to get an ROI out of it. You know, no one's just going to give you money just to stick there. It's not like Formula One. No one's just going to give you money to stick their company logo on your car. You have to do a lot more than just that. You have to provide business opportunity for them. Yes, you're getting them some exposure, which is beneficial, but it's not, you know, it's not enough to justify the kind of big ticket items that maybe are required for racing. So I think in the short answer is yes, I'm always looking to do more racing, but equally business is something that's an integral part of my life. And you know, as long as I can, I will continue to keep investing, trying to work with other entrepreneurs who have, you know, who are far smarter and better at what they do than I am, quite frankly, back their ideas, help them where I know that I can help in the sort of narrower window of things that I'm really good at. And that's the beauty of life, I think. It's just, you know, you keep moving forward. Things work, things sometimes work less, but, you know, the goal is as long as you can have things working more often than not, the likelihood is success will come. And with that success, there should be financial reward, which of course helps to fund the racing. And, you know, I don't know, my kids, for example, I have 3 sons. They're all very young at the moment, but God forbid they might decide that they like the look of race cars. And, you know, one day I do have a slight dream. One day I will do a, you know, endurance race, a 24-hour race with all of my sons. You know, that would be the dream. You know, eventually the 4 of us doing a 24-hour race together would just be the icing on the cake. But, you know, God willing and all the rest of it, we'll see. But equally, if they're not into racing, I'd be very supportive of whatever they want to do. So in many ways, hopefully they don't like racing because it's so expensive. I'm not sure how I deal with 4 race car drivers as opposed to just one. That could get very, very expensive indeed. But you know, it's all about following your dreams. And for me, that just happens to be racing. I wish it was golf or something else that was a lot cheaper, but you know, this is my poison, this is my passion, so gotta keep focusing on it. But equally, I'm still passionate about business and want to keep being successful and getting more and more good results out of the things that we're putting our energy into.
Ed McDermott, where can people find you if they want to learn more and support or GT or just racing?
I'm on Instagram. My handle is I believe it's Ed McDermott 12 or Ed McDermott 1. Either way, you'll find me. It's pretty easy. I'm on LinkedIn, so reach out if you're into business and you just want to talk about it, or you have good ideas or whatever. I can't promise I'm able to help, but I can hopefully maybe even introduce you to people that might be able to help. And yeah, I'm on all the various sort of social media channels, and yeah, love to talk with people, and you know, where possible, try and help. And equally, I'm always yeah, I just enjoy people who are passionate about what they do, whatever that might be. And I think, you know, as a world, as a species, we should all be reaching out to each other more. You know, there's a lot of mental health issues in the world. I work with a really cool charity called My Black Dog, which is they run a phone line effectively for people struggling with their mental health. So I'm really big into wanting to do stuff to help with that particular space, because you know, I have had my own problems with anxiety over the years. Luckily, I'm very high functioning, but you know, it's still incredibly difficult for all of us to move forward in life, and we should all be trying to sort of give each other support, encouragement, and help, whether that be with general mental health stuff, or business problems, or you know, a bit of inspiration, a bit of aspiration, because ultimately that's what helps us all drive forward. And that'll be how the youngsters of today end up, you know, curing cancer in the future and all that sort of stuff. So yeah, we should all be encouraging one another a lot more than we currently do, is my view. So what you're doing here with your podcast, I think, is fantastic. So good on you, mate.
Thank you for watching this episode of Ed McDermott. If you like watching racing content, then I've got NASCAR's Jesse Iwuji right here.